After studying this module, you should be able to understand the idea of self in different Indian traditional perspectives, compare the Indian thought with Western concept of self, learn the Indian concepts of Atman, Purusha, Prakriti, etc. Assimilate and comprehend the idea of Ananta in Buddhist philosophy and identify the koshas and the Indian art of healing oneself. Self has been a key construct in several schools of psychology. It has been researched in various areas such as personality and social psychology. Self is an issue of common interest in Indian and Western traditions. Historically, the roots of self can be traced to William James with his influential text, Principles of Psychology, with his distinction between two fundamental aspects of self, the I and me, that is the self as subject and self as object. The me aspect is the sum total of all a person can call his. James 1892 and 1961, and is constituted by the actual qualities that define self as known. James formulated these subdivisions into a hierarchy, with the material self being at the lowest end and the spiritual self being regarded as supremely precious, occupying the highest tier. A fourth constituent was also added after research studies, which was the active qualities of self, capabilities and typical activities. The me is stable, harmonious and continuous in a sense that all change is gradual. Hence, the Western tradition has generally focused on self as object. In the Western tradition, two trends can be seen clearly, one denying the self represented by Skinner and other with self and identity at core by Erik Erikson. Erikson proposed that the changes in the images of self or self-definitions are continuous and are a result of internal or maturational and external, especially social factors. Erikson was a follower of Freud, proposed the importance of social events in child development and disagreed on the significance of biological and sexual impulses. Erikson conceptualizes the life course progression as consisting of 8 developmental psychosocial tasks or crises. Resolving these crises or achieving the developmental task at each stage not only affects that stage as well as later stages of psychosocial development. Erikson viewed crisis not as a threat or catastrophe but as a transition period in the life cycle which can increase an individual's vulnerability, causing maladjustment, or lighten his or her potential and become a source of strength and capacity. Self has been a key construct in several schools of psychology. It has been researched in various areas such as personality and social psychology. Self is an issue of common interest in Indian and Western traditions. Historically, the roots of self can be traced to William James with his influential text, Principles of Psychology, with his distinction between two fundamental aspects of self, the I and me, that is the self as subject and self as object. The me aspect is the sum total of all a person can call his. James 1892 and 1961, and is constituted by the actual qualities that define self as known. James formulated these subdivisions into a hierarchy, with the material self being at the lowest end and the spiritual self being regarded as supremely precious, occupying the highest tier. A fourth constituent was also added after research studies, which was the active qualities of self, capabilities and typical activities. The me is stable, harmonious and continuous in a sense that all change is gradual. Hence, The Western tradition has generally focused on self as object. In the Western tradition, two trends can be seen clearly, one denying the self represented by Skinner, and other with self and identity at core by Erik Erikson. Erikson proposed that the changes in the images of self or self definitions are continuous and are a result of internal or maturational and external, especially social factors.
Indian approaches to self-identity, meaning of identity. Paranjpe has pointed out three meanings of identity. A. The quality or condition of being the same in substance, composition, nature, properties, or in particular qualities under consideration, absolute or essential sameness or oneness. B. The condition or fact that a person or a thing is itself and not something else. And C. The condition of being identified in feelings, interest, and the like. The first set of meanings clearly refers to the philosophical implications of identity, whereas the second meaning is at the heart of the forensic conception of personhood. The third meaning of identity is rare but quite common in psychology, wherein the speaker identifies with a certain nationality, vocation, or other aspect of his or her social existence. The indigenous perspectives of self are gaining voice and are now recognized as legitimate academic endeavors. Traditionally, there are two radically opposite views on self. The ancient Upanishads conceived of the Atman or the self as the fundamental principle of unity and permanence that manifest in human experience. The Manduk Upanishad called it as the fourth state of consciousness, that is, an extraordinary state. Gautam Buddha was opposed to the several ideas and practices of the Upanishads. Following Buddha, several schools of thought developed in Asia, and of these the Samkhya, Yoga, and the Advaita schools developed varying perspective on the nature of self. The term Purusha is used in Samkhya and Yoga and Atman in the Advaita for the self-sameness. Other schools of Buddhism developed a different view of the no self or denial of the self. The focus of this kind of thought is that an assumption of the permanence of body and possessions often leads to increase in craving for adoring the body and amassing possessions, while at the same time ignoring the need to change oneself in a morally desirable ways. This would help persons recognize the folly in presuming the perceptual continuation of the material me and help them try change oneself in a morally desirable ways. Self in tradition of Upanishads. Perhaps the earliest systematic perspective developed on this issue was that of the ancient Upanishad called the Brihadaranyaka. In it, the sage Yagvallav points out to his two wives on the eve of his retirement from active life that the love one has for children, home, property, etc., has at its roots the love for oneself. He goes on to implore that self is the most important theme of inquiry in life. Then he suggests the right way to realize the true nature of the self. First, listening to or studying thoughts about it, and second, deep contamination on them. The strong affirmation of the self in this ancient source is the inspiration for a sophisticated theory of the self in the long and rich tradition of the Advaita Vedanta system. A guidelines for this inquiry was presented in another famous dialogue of the Katha Upanishad. In it, Nachiketa, a teenager cursed by his angry father under odd circumstances, is stranded at the gates of the kingdom of Yama, the god of death. Yama, embraced by having failed to provide an adequate welcome and succor to this unexpected guest, offers him three boons. In return for the first boon, the boy asks for an amicable reunion with his angry father. Then, in return for the second boon, Nachiketa asks for knowledge of ways to attain a place in heaven, and this is granted. Now, having secured a place in heaven after death, Nachiketa asks Yama to explain what, if anything, remains about a person beyond the cycle of birth and death. Yama avoids answering this question, saying it is too difficult a question to him to answer and for a young man to understand. Instead, he offers the young lad rebirth on earth and a long life endowed with great imperial power and countless damsels more beautiful than ever the heavenly nymphs. Nachiketas refuses this offer, saying all such rewards could only be commensurate with the good deeds, and as such they must end at an appropriate time. What Nachiketa yearned for was a never ending bliss, and not mundane as well as heavenly pleasures that must come to an end sooner or later. As such, his eyes are set on finding something here and now, during the present lifetime rather than in afterlife, that guarantees an end to the perceptual cycle of work and rewards. In other words, it illustrates the most important and persistent theme of the Indian culture, namely the yearning for a permanent solution to the problem of the perpetual circle of happiness and misery, which follow one another, often leaving a negative balance. The solution suggested by Yam answered to Nachiketa and followed and continually refined in the long tradition is to realize the changeless basis underlying the changing images of the self which keep chasing the ever reciting pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of life. Immortality, in this sense, is not the continuation of good things in life as known to oneself, but the discovery of that something in the human beings which defies change. The true self underlying the incessant parade of changing images of the self, it is claimed presents a state of limitless bliss and inner peace that is beyond pleasure and pain commonly brought by success and failures in the game of life. Once the permanent basis of self is realized, then eternal bliss is guaranteed. Self in Tethria Upanishad. In the Tethria Upanishad, the idea of Panchkosh or five shields is developed, which considers the Jeev as a multi-layered hierarchical structure. There are five layers or shields nested in one another. The gross physical body is said to be the product of food, Ananmaya Kosh, different form, and within it is the self that consists of life, Pranamaya Kosh, which involves breathing and other metabolic processes that activate the organs and keep them functioning. Within it and different from it is the third layer called Manomaya Kosh, which involves the sense organs. It is considered as the seat of the ego striving and manifests itself in the form of personal involvement. Next is the shield of intellect or cognition, Vijnanmaya Kosh, that involves ideas, constructs and concepts used in knowing world. The innermost core of the self is the Anandamaya Kosh or joyous shield. It reflects bliss. The inner layers get progressively subtler than the outer layer, and the duality between self and non-self is minimized. Self in the Advaita method. The Advaita method, as mentioned in its medieval text Trikdishya Vivek, which is often attributed to Shankaracharya, examines the common manifestations of the self which are open to change and which are changeless. It concludes that the self as sheer drig is the only thing that remains ever unchanged. The oldest school in the Indian tradition, Sankhya, conceptualizes two fundamental principles of reality, such that one called Purush accounts for pure sentience or the capacity for awareness, and the other called Prakriti, which refers to insistent materiality. The aim of a person is to discriminate and realize the true self to be pure sentence of Purush, and this cannot be found in any objective manifestations of selfhood. It is pointed out that there is unending dissatisfaction with the present in the hopes of something better in future. Thus, the Advaita tradition developed a method of meditation that involves a critical inquiry into the nature of the self guided by a principle that the true self is that in oneself which is unchanging. A clear distinction is made between the self as subject, drig, as opposed to the self as object, drishya. The latter category includes not only body, social roles one plays, and other such aspects of selfhood that are open to public observation, but also one's own thoughts, dreams, and imagery that constitute objects of thoughts accessible to a person in his own private domain of the intentional mode of the consciousness. The self as subject refers to the center of the universe of experience, which is not observed in turn but can be directly experienced in a non intentional state of consciousness. The non intentional state, called Nirvikalp Samadhi, is a state in which the subject object distinction is said to disappear. The Advaita path to self realization is called Gyan Yoga. Successful practitioners of Gyan Yoga are very rare, and those that might be there right now would hardly announce, let alone brag about their success. Proclaiming self realization is just not done. It is not kosher, so to speak, for the absence of the egoism is the very hallmark of self realization. Yet there are exceptional individuals who are widely recognized as successful practitioners of Jnana Yoga, such as Sri Ramana Maharshi. Self in Sankhya Yoga system. According to Sankhya Yoga system, it is Purush or the true self which provides the unchanging backdrop on which varied images of the self keep appearing and disappearing. The ego as identified with passing thoughts stops functioning for a moment and gives the mediator the experience of no ego. This state is called samadhi. After returning to the normal day to day life and its stresses, the yogi does not feel easily bored down with successes and failures or stress and has developed an inner peace. A person who successfully practices yoga becomes grounded in an I beyond me and its egoistic attachments. When the mind is emptied of all its contents, brings movements of self realization, and its effects can be seen in the changes in one personality. Patanjali Yoga is a method of restraining the flow of thoughts in the mind so as to ultimately bring it to a halt through a detailed method. Vyas, the earliest and the most important commentator of Patanjali's teachings, claims that true self is directly experienced when the flow of thoughts stop. Sri Aurobindo experiences following his successful practice of yoga. It threw me suddenly into a condition above and without thought, unstained by any mental or vital movement. There was no ego, no real world. There was no one or many even. Only just absolutely that featureless, relationless, sheer, indescribable, unthinkable, absolute, yet supremely real and solely real. The modern scientists have conducted innumerable research on the benefits of yoga on human mind and body. Some of the benefits are: yoga not only benefits the body but also the soul. When one is in harmony, the journey through life is calmer, happier, and more fulfilling. All round fitness. You are truly healthy when you are not just physically fit but also mentally and emotionally balanced. As Sri Ravi Shankar puts it, health is not a mere absence of disease, it is a dynamic expression of life in terms of how joyful, loving, and enthusiastic you are. Weight loss. Sun salutations and Kapalbhati pranayam help lose weight. Also, regular yoga sensitizes us to the needs of the body. Stress relief. Yoga helps one get rid of stress that accumulates daily in both the body and mind. Yoga postures, pranayam, and meditation are effective techniques to release stress. Inner peace. Yoga is also one of the best ways to calm a disturbed mind. Improved immunity. Our system is a seamless blend of the body, mind, and spirit. Yoga poses massage organs and strengthen muscles, breathing techniques and meditation release stress and improve immunity. Living with greater awareness, the wandering of the mind can be controlled and save ourselves from getting stressed or worked up and relax the mind. Living in the moment helps one stay happy and focused. Better relationships. A mind that is relaxed, happy, and contented is better able to deal with sensitive relationship matters. Yoga and meditation work on keeping the mind happy and peaceful. Benefit from the strengthened special bond you share with people close to you. Increased energy. Yoga every day provides the secret to feeling fresh and energetic even after a long day. A 10-minute online guided meditation benefits you immensely, leaving you refreshed and recharged in the middle of a hectic day. Better flexibility and posture. Regular yoga practice stretches and tones the body muscles and also makes them strong. It also helps improve your body posture when you stand, sit, sleep, or walk. This would in turn help relieve you of body pain due to incorrect posture. Better intuition. Yoga and meditation have the power to improve your intuitive ability so that you effortlessly realize what needs to be done, when and how to yield positive results. It works. You only need to experience it yourself. Self in Vedantic view. In the Vedantic view, there is a clear recognition of I as a doer, are an agent of action, karta, as well as enjoyer of pleasure and sufferer of pain, bhokta. It is contended that the consequences of a life of karma result in pleasure and pain, prosperity and adversity, while liberation from the circle of birth and death can be achieved when there is no more karma. And to attain this end, all desires, vasana, must come to an end and a sense of complete detachment from the worldly objects, leading to a stance of a witness, sakshi, be developed. The doctrine of karma refers to the lawfulness of the universal and is conceived as a cosmic principle whereby each person must inevitably face the consequences of one's thoughts and actions, whether good or bad, whether of this life or those of the previous ones. The doctrine stresses individual responsibility for all of one's actions and outcomes, including one's well being and misfortunes. It enthrones man as the maker of one's own fate. The notion of justice is inherent in the exposition of the doctrine. The doctrine of karma says, as a man sows, so shall he reap, but was also made to say, as a man reaps, so he must have sown. Historically, it was towards the end of the Vedic period that the doctrine of karma came to be formulated in all its elements. The Rig Veda developed the concept of Rit, which implies the existence of eternal cosmic law which holds that the universe is orderly, rational, and is not subject to the blind whims and fancies of the gods, and that the gods themselves are bound by this supreme law. The working of karma is presumed to be wholly dispassionate, just, neither cruel nor merciful. Though one cannot escape from the workings of this principle, there is hope, for one has the potential to design one's future by closely watching and being aware of one's actions in the present. This karma should be performed in the spirit of yoga without any expectation of the desired outcome. The Gita makes it clear that there is no place in the whole universe where one can find escape from one's karmas. It is karma that is the cause of rebirth, and in a certain sense, it is also karma that manifests in successive lives. All actions are supposed to leave their traces which each person carries within oneself, sanskar, from the previous births. These sanskars are like seeds that fructify under appropriate circumstances in the form of seeking or avoiding something or the other that sowed the seeds. Thus, one has to go through suffering in the present life which one has deserved due to past deeds, but one can alter one's future through appropriate actions. The new experience and actions leave their traces which ripen or fructify in turn, and the cycle continues. The denial of self in the Buddhist tradition. Gautam Buddha rebelled against several aspects of the Upanishad tradition, saw a danger in teaching the doctrine of Atman as something in a person that remains unchanged throughout. In Buddha's time, the Upanishad teachings were accessible only to the higher caste, and the notion of Atman explained in abstract terms might have been understood by only a minority of the privileged class. Buddha emphasized the changes in selfhood as they are commonly encountered by ordinary people. It is implied that for the common man it is necessary to first change oneself in an ethical manner before starting a search for an elusive inner self. In fact, the denial of an unchanging self is an integral part of the Buddhist teaching. Nevertheless, the overall thrust of these teaching is to overcome the negative effects of an ego that identifies itself with the changing images of the self.
Now let us summarize this module. The independent and the transcendental self is referred to as Atman, which implies the conscious selfhood or I-ness, whereas Ahankar, mindness, represents the inflated sense of personal worth, which is a consequence of the ignorance of one's true being. Atman is a non-material realization of the real self. The material self is situated and relates to behavior. The empirical self represents the state of being which is hierarchically lower than the self of the ultimate. Thus, in the Indian cultural thought, self is situated in a cosmogenic frame of reference. It situates a person in multiple contexts encompassing material as well as spiritual planes of reality. It essentially subscribes to a biological, organic, and holistic worldview. The self or selfhood is culturally variable and assumes diverse forms that characterize within and between cultural similarities. Self is understood and resolved in different ways by different cultures. The physical, social, and spiritual aspects are differently articulated to make a sense of self. The spiritual and the philosophical tradition followed results in different compositions of self. The rubric of self provides us a continuity connecting the present with past as well as what we will be in future. The Indian texts provide various ways of realizations of self through different methodologies. They also give an insight into the social representations of those times and provide guidance to present day researchers as well as seekers.